the government, even though they'd been denying it for decades, saying that they had any interest in the UFO issue, and they weren't investigating it, they weren't following it, they weren't really storing any information about it. And that's been put to the lie because there are thousands of documents now showing the actual details, interviewing the witnesses to these sightings.
My name is Danny Sheehan. I'm a constitutional litigator who's worked some of the most important cases in modern American history. From Pentagon Papers, the Watergate scandal, to Iran-Contra. My legal career has led me now to this pivotal moment. As our human family confronts the implications of the existence here on our planet of extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional non-human species. I will be your guide as we dive into the profound philosophical, theological, and public policy questions pertaining to the UFO phenomenon, alien life, and the citizen movement for disclosure. This is the Full Disclosure Podcast, coming to you from the New Paradigm Institute on SpectraVision Radio.
Good afternoon, my friends. What I want to do today is, first, I want to cover the international and national news this week in the context of the May 8th initial tranche of UFO documents that have been released officially by the United States government. But I want to give us the national and international context in which this has been happening. And then I want to address the actual release of this information and put it in some context for us. Today, Donald Trump is now once again aggressively threatening to reinitiate the military war against Iran unless the Iranian government agrees to open the Straits of Hormuz and give up all of its enriched uranium and agree to forego the development of any nuclear weapons for at least a 20-year period. This is not happening. The Iranian government has responded already immediately, stating absolutely not. It's not going to do that it is going to insist upon maintaining sovereign control over the Straits of Hormuz. It's not going to send any of the enriched uranium to the United States. And the oil tankers of Iran are being stopped in the Straits of Hormuz by U.S. military warships per the order of Donald Trump. And the international shipping is being stopped by the Iranian military in the landmines that they've placed in the straits. And they are ushering individual oil tankers through the minefields as we speak. But the flow of commerce, including especially the oil through the Straits of Hormuz, has decreased by 20 to 25%. In the context of Trump threatening to reinitiate the massive bombing of Iran, the major thinking amongst the people discussing this publicly from the various think tanks and universities believe that Iran is not going to succumb to the demands of Donald Trump. But they are not at all convinced that Donald Trump is actually going to reinitiate the bombing against Iran, even though he's asserting he's going to. This is indicative of the fact that Donald Trump has basically no credibility with international experts with regard to any promise that he makes. And this is totally destabilizing the international economic order right now. He is going to be flying to meet with Xi Jinping, the president of China. Very clearly, one of the top agenda items is going to be Donald Trump's attempt to get Xi to intervene with Iran and try to persuade Iran, uselessly probably, to try to persuade Iran to simply succumb to all of the demands that Trump is making. They're not offering any kind of real compromise on any of the demands he's making. He's going to try to get President Xi to intervene on his behalf with Iran. He's also going to be asking China to help the United States military open the Straits of Hormuz if Iran refuses to do so voluntarily. So Donald Trump is, as you see this, it's actually physically on his way to China. And this is amid fear on the part of major experts inside the administration, being deeply concerned that what Trump may do in his effort to try to get China to be supportive of his war against Iran is he may either intentionally or inadvertently signal to Xi that Trump is willing to allow China to basically take control of Taiwan, in light of the fact that Trump has announced repeatedly that he believes that the way that the international order ought to be arranged is that the most powerful nation state in a given region of the planet ought to be establishing hegemony over the region. He's doing this, the rationale for his asserting complete control over all of the Western Hemisphere, from all the way, not only North America, but all of Central and South America, all the way up through Canada, up to Greenland. And in light of that demand on his part, he's inclined to yield sovereignty over regions of the planet to the most powerful hegemonic force. And this, of course, is China, pertaining to Taiwan. So that the international experts are quite concerned that this is a danger that might happen during this visit. At the same time, Russia continues bombing and physically invading the Ukraine. That's still going on. They are demanding the complete cession, the ceding of the Donbas region of Ukraine to Russia. Trump is basically pressuring the Ukrainian leadership to make that agreement, to basically yield the entire Donbas region to Russia in order to stop that war. But Trump is not really providing any substantive support to the Ukraine. He keeps veiled threats going on that he may someday decide to give support for them, but nobody believes him anymore, one way or another. So Russia isn't really feeling threatened by that. Israel continues to bomb southern Lebanon, asserting that they're attacking Hezbollah, but in fact are being universally reported as killing major numbers of civilian population, attacking places that are not centers of the Hezbollah at all, as well as continuing its supporting of the settlements into the West Bank, now expanding the boundaries of Israel to include virtually all of southern Lebanon now. This is all under the aegis of Netanyahu and the Likud alliance that he has with them. Gaza still remains totally devastated, and the people starving there in dire need of medical assistance. And yet the Trump administration, Trump himself, still keeps talking about simply having Gaza turned into some major casino center in the world as their economic stimulus. And meanwhile, the people are starving, and non-combatants are dying in southern Lebanon. And just as a side note, in Sudan, the civil war is still raging there between the armed forces of the Sudanese government against the rapid support forces, with literally millions of people being driven from their homes by this civil war, and massive starvation is setting in the Sudan. And the United States, Trump administration, and the Republican-controlled Congress are engaged in no efforts of any meaningful kind to provide any relief for those people. In the national news, the reports are that the American public now is starting to, the term that's being used is feel crushed economically by the increase in food prices and gas prices that are being generated by the sealing of the Straits of Hormuz and the war that Donald Trump is waging against Iran. 77% of the people now are blaming Trump for this significant increase in the cost of food and transportation in the country. Airlines, Spirit Airlines, for example, are going completely out of business now because they cannot afford the huge increases in the cost of jet fuel that is being generated by the war in the Middle East now, generated by Donald Trump. There's a rate of inflation now is being projected at the present time of 3.8%. It's the highest that it's been in ages, and this is all being blamed on the tariffs that have been unilaterally imposed by Donald Trump and his war against Iran. And at the present time, there's no indication whatsoever that the Republican-controlled Congress of the United United States is going to be willing to invoke not only the War Powers Act of 1973, stopping Trump from engaging in any military conduct ab initio, since he's gotten no support from Congress for this, but Trump is also asserting that even the provisions of the War Powers Act, that unless Congress affirmatively acts to authorize him to continue engaging in this military activity, he's prohibited by law from engaging in that activity any farther. And he has been openly asserting that he does not intend to respect that at all in his desire to reinitiate the military assault on Iran unless they comply with his demands. So Trump's approval rating is now down into 30% area as they're approaching the midterm elections that are now scheduled for about 6 months from now. And so what Donald Trump is doing is he's actively engaged in pressing all of the southern states to engage in redistricting their congressional districts to eliminate any and all of the Democratic seats. His 3 justices that he appointed to the United States Supreme Court, Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, and Coney Barrett, have all joined with Justice Thomas and Alito and Chief Justice Roberts, all appointed by Republican presidents, George W. Bush and George H.W. Bush, have now ruled in Louisiana versus Calais that the state legislatures that are controlled by Republicans are completely constitutionally entitled to gerrymander their congressional districts so as to eliminate any and all Democratic districts if they can do that. And the Democratic Party, in its effort to respond to this, has put up to a popular vote in Virginia. The question is whether they will, in response to this action on the part of the Republican legislatures, they voted to redistrict Virginia. But that has been struck down in the case of Scott versus McDougal by the Virginia State Supreme Court, declaring that that is unconstitutional, as, of course, it actually is on the part of both parties. But the Democratic Party is willing to recognize the unconstitutionality of this. But since the Supreme Court has ruled to the contrary, the Democrats are apparently preparing to abide by that. And they're trying to figure out now how they can have an honest and open election taking place in November. Thousands of pages of documents have been released. The position that the New Paradigm Institute takes on the substantive content of this first tranche of documents is virtually identical to the positions that have been taken publicly by Richard Dolan and also by Ross Coulthart. Ross, in his reality check newscast on News Nation, has pointed out, along with Richard Dolan, that for those of us who are significantly well informed about the kind of information that's already publicly available regarding the UFO phenomenon and the non-human intelligence that is understood to be responsible for it. The kind of information that is already available has now been simply duplicated by this first release. 99% of everything that's been released in this first tranche of information is already known by anybody who is reasonably up to date on the information about the UFO phenomenon. But it's extremely important to note that within the first 24 hours of this release of these millions of documents, that over 550 million people have gone to the website, inappropriately designated as war.gov/UFO. That's the site that you go to for any of you who haven't gone to look at these yet. You will, because most of you are fairly well informed about the UFO issue, or else you wouldn't be following this podcast, that you will note that a lot of it is warmed over information. It's information about what's been released by Project Blue Book, again, covering the kind of history of documents that have been released. One of the new things about the release is that there are literally thousands of copies of what are basically 302s. For every federal government investigator that interviews anyone in their official capacity, they have to prepare a report, a summary of what the questions were that were asked and what the information is that's been provided. These are called the 302s, but that's an FBI designation. But what we've discovered now in here is something we all knew, and that is that whenever there is a sighting of a UFO and the people start reporting it publicly and calling government authorities, state and federal authorities about it all, the United States Air Force has been sending two-person teams to interview these people. And even though they'd been denying it for decades, saying that they had any interest in the UFO issue and they weren't investigating it, they weren't following it, they weren't really storing any information about it. Now, that's been put to the lie by this May 8th release, because there are thousands of documents now showing the actual details of the interview by United States Air Force Office of Special Investigations going and interviewing the witnesses to these sightings. So that is something new in these documents. There are also a number of videos in the release that there's like 100 of varying quality, but there are some fairly stark videos of what can only be described as a kind of a classic flying saucer. Now, it's important, again, that I would propose that you go to Richard Dolan's podcast of May 9th, and also to Ross Coulthart's Reality Check News Nation report, and get the details of exactly why this release is a bit underwhelming. And in no instance in this first tranche is there any position paper set forth telling what the government thought about this in any way. They just have these kind of naked field reports, basically, in these videos without any type of analysis, any type of evaluation of what the nature of the UFO is. They do have the memos that point out that they recognize the 5 identifying qualities of a UFO. They have some memos on that, about the instant acceleration, the lack of signals and heat signatures, etc., their ability to engage in immediate acceleration and to change directions at a 90-degree angle at top speeds. These 5 identifiers that Lou Elizondo has talked about are confirmed, and this tranche of document releases does indicate that the United States government believes these UFOs to be real. So this is an additional confirmation that the United States government officially acknowledges the UFO phenomenon is real. But nowhere in any of these documents is there any acknowledgement that we, or the United States government, or any element of the United States government has taken into custody any real UFO or any of the non-human occupants. So there's an entire realm of reality outside of the information that's now been publicly released by the United States government that is subject to future release and investigation. In our essay today, I want to go over giving us some kind of a sense of approximately where we are at with regard to the UFO disclosure following the May 8th release of information. The second major story is that Congressman Eric Burleson, who, as you know, holds the brief for the UFO in ET issue inside the task force on declassification of government secrets that was established by the House Oversight Committee, that he announced publicly that if, in fact, the Trump administration did not publicly release the 46 videos, in addition to those that were released on May 8th, he is going to go onto the floor of the House of Representatives and invoking his immunity under the speech and debate clause of the Congress, which grants immunity against any civil or criminal prosecution of anything that is said by any member of Congress on the floor. Eric Burleson has stated publicly now that he is going to publish all 46 of these videos, which he has a copy of, if these are not released, because the chair of the task force on declassification of government secrets, Anna Paulina Luna, has written a letter to Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, demanding the public release of these 46 videos that have been seen now by the members of the task force. And Hegseth had not been agreeing to do this. But what's happened now is Donald Trump has issued a statement now stating that he intends to have these 46 videos released on Friday, the 15th of May. So this is the situation that we're in, with a promise from Donald Trump that he's going to be making weekly releases of these documents. Now, I had stated earlier that the position of the New Paradigm Institute is that just because President Trump had announced on February 19th that he was going to be giving a directive to the executive branch agencies to release this information publicly, we kept saying that, you couldn't trust him. There was no need to really believe he was going to do this until and unless he did it. Now he has begun the process. He has released this information, and as you will see when you go to Richard Dolan's evaluation of these documents and those of Ross Coulter, this is not just a complete nothing burger, the release of this information. There's some minimal data here, but not evaluating the content of any of the sightings or any of the reports at all. Now, one of the reports, and this is one of the singular pieces of most important information, there's the release of a field investigation that was undertaken by government officials of a sighting in which the witnesses to the sighting report seeing 4 non-human beings, 4 to 4.5 feet tall, getting out of a UFO landed on the ground. Now, that is one of the single distinguishing characteristics of this release that differentiates it from anything that had been recognized already by the government. This is an acknowledgement that there's the first report of the actual physical sighting of a non-human being directly connected to a UFO. That is going to have to be part of what the next releases of information is going to have to come to deal with. We want you to join us in our future episodes of this Full Disclosure podcast. So join us here regularly on the New Paradigm Institute's Full Disclosure podcast. It's being brought to you by SpectraVision Radio.
To join the citizen movement for disclosure, visit newparadigminstitute.org/take action.